Hello, I'm Sophiralou and welcome to my channel. Hello guys and welcome to my review on the Spectra Ad Markers. These markers are available on Amazon, on the Spectra Ad Store, as well as Hobbycraft. It's something I have not seen before, so I thought I'd pick some up and have a quick review of these and see what I think of them and give my general thoughts on them. This video has not been sponsored in any way, shape or form. I like to pick up markers sometimes when I see them, if I see them slightly cheap and on a budget, to see and compare and contrast them to my Winsor & Newton range to give a fair review on the products that I play around with. Alcoholic markers are something that is quite a staple in most artists' supplies, and a lot of people do use them. And where some people tend to lean towards specific brands, I think it's only fair that we compare and contrast and then see what's out there, because there is a lot of alcohol markers out there overall and that you can compare and contrast them to. So this is set 1 of the Spectra Ad Markers. There's 95 colours in total, I believe, with the Spectra markers, and you can get them at most sites. I actually picked these up off Amazon quite a while ago, and at the time I picked them up for about, I think they were about £16 in the sale, but the regular retail price on these is £22, which roughly is around about £1.83 per marker. So they do tend to be on the little bit more expensive side of the markers, but considering the Winsor & Newton range regular retail price is $33.99 according to the Winsor & Newton website, I thought that these would be fair enough to go to and have a compare and contrast between them. I would compare these to Copic markers, but unfortunately I don't actually own any Copic markers because they are too far out of my price range. I tend to only get markers when they are on sale and tend to get stuff that I know that I can afford and work with in that way. So trying these out, the first thing I wanted to do was colour swatch them. I think it's always important to colour swatch markers when you first get them, just to make sure, because sometimes the caps can be a little off the colours, and I was pleasantly surprised overall by the marker quality and how the ink came out. The colours really closely match the tips, which is absolutely phenomenal, and that is something that you really want to do. So in order to be fair, I thought I'd compare and contrast these to set 1 of the Winsor & Newton brush markers. Now the only difference is I did end up swapping out the colourless Splendor and the warm grey tone for a plum colour to try and match the set 1 of the Spectra Ad Markers as much as I possibly could. The colours aren't exactly the same in both sets, but I figured this would be more fair to try and have the colours as close as possible. I do have more in the Pro marker range than I do in the brush marker range, simply because I tend to use bullet tips much more than I do brush markers. I personally just don't like brush markers, and that's just a personal thing. It's nothing against them in any way, shape or form. It's not that I think the ink quality is any lower or that they blend any better, anything like that. It's just I personally don't like brush markers because I find that they run out much quicker than bullet tips, and that is a genuine thing for me, and I like my markers to last quite a while, so bullet tips are perfect for me. I found that when I was swatching the markers, they were lovely and they weren't too juicy, which means there was the right amount of ink coming out of the nibs. And when I was comparing and contrasting them to the Winsor & Newton range, I noticed that the paper quality was fairly similar the ink quality was fairly similar on the paper that I'm using. Now, you are always going to get a better quality ink and a better smoothness on a paper that is smooth. So you're always going to lay down ink much better on a smooth paper. So if you are after doing marker only art, I do recommend using Bristol board or using actual marker paper. And that's if you want your colours to shine the most. I choose to use mixed media paper simply because I know that when I use markers I tend to mix media on a lot of stuff, so I use pencil or sometimes I use watercolours, so mixed media paper is something that I use the most. So personally for me, I like to try my markers on this sort of paper. This is so that I can check also the quality of the ink on the paper, which sometimes you are going to get spotting just because they aren't that smooth of paper. It's got a little bit of grip to it, and if you just want complete smooth colour, I do recommend using Bristol paper. You are going to get a little bit of spotting, a little bit, I call it little bits of speckling on the paper if you are going to use a mixed media paper, just when it comes to alcohol markers, just because it isn't the smoothest paper to put on. But I digress, because I use my Winsor & Newton markers a lot, and I don't have that much of a problem with speckling overall with them. So that's why I like to compare and contrast them on the same paper, because it is something that I use the most. So what were these like to use? They were absolutely lovely. The colours were so bright and so vibrant, I could not fault them at all. The ink was lying down smoothly. I didn't have much of mid-tones in between a lot of the colours, unfortunately, so you'll notice that some of the blending isn't as smooth as I would like, but that is something that's to happen when you only have a limited palette of colours. If you are going to want something quite smooth, say for example if you're going to go from yellow to green, you're going to want a middle colour, yellow-green, to help make that blending so much smoother, and that is just a problem that tends to happen when you don't have a massive range of colours. You are going to get smoother blending if you are choosing colours which are more similar in tone. If you're trying a very dark colour and a very light colour without a mid-tone in between, it is going to be much harder to blend. So it's just something that I've picked up while I've drawn over the years, and what I've used with markers over the years. It's something that I've noticed in particular. But overall, these markers were really nice to use. My pros, it was beautiful, vibrant ink, brush marker, which for a lot of artists that is a plus, and because it's quite a cheap brush marker as well, it felt like that it was well within its price range. It didn't feel too expensive, and for the ink quality for what you got is absolutely phenomenal. There was a little bit of speckling when I oversaturated some of the darker colours, but other than that, there was not that much of an issue. Overall, I thought these were really beautiful to use. And the colours are fairly close to the cap, and because they are available in most craft stores, and I believe I have seen them, I've definitely seen them in Hobbycraft. I haven't been to other craft stores, so I couldn't give you a verdict on that. But overall, I was very pleasantly surprised with these, and I was really happy with the way that they came out. So after I'd done my test with the Spectra Ad Markers, I decided to do a similar one with the Winsor & Newton to compare and contrast to show you the difference between them. The cons with these markers, unfortunately, is that they are not refillable. So if you are after a marker that is going to last you longer, the only marker that I know on the market at the moment that is refillable and boasts it being refillable are the Copic range. Unfortunately, the Copic range is much more expensive, with it being roughly from about £3.50 to $5 per marker, and they have a varying range of markers as well. There are different ad markers according to the website. When I was looking at them earlier, they are ad markers, and they have different ranges of markers, and the range, the one that I'm using is the Spectra markers, and they do have quite a range in there. I'll leave links down below for you to check them out. So if you are after a refillable marker, unfortunately these aren't refillable, which can be a downside for most artists. But if you are looking for a brush marker range which is within a decent budget, so you can get them from, it says regular retail price of $22, but the lowest I've seen them is £16 on Amazon when I picked them up, so I'll leave links down below so that you can check them out. And that is a fairly low budget per marker, and it is fairly reasonable as well. Yes, it's not a massive amount of colour range, but you can get a lot of tonal range just from the markers themselves, and you can build up your collection eventually. I personally don't mind whether or not a marker is refillable. That's not a plus or a minus for me. It may be for other people, but for me it's just not a huge thing. If I find that I went from Copic to Winsor & Newton because not only was it more affordable and within budget for me, it was just something that I was much happier using. They can struggle to blend a little bit, especially with the range. And another small thing that I wasn't personally, it's just a personal preference, is on the Winsor & Newton range you have a pointed edge which shows you where the brush tip is, and a rounded edge which shows you where the chisel nib is. They don't have these on the Spectra, so sometimes I do get a little bit confused which end is which, but that's just a personal preference. But overall, these markers were excellent to use and I do highly recommend them. If you are after a brush marker that's well within range and isn't too expensive, I do recommend these, and I think the colours on them were absolutely phenomenal, lovely and bright, and I just thought overall they worked fantastically. So I hope this review has been somewhat helpful. Yet again, these thoughts are my own personal feelings about the markers. I just feel that sometimes we all have our own personal preference when it comes to our markers, and having a look and seeing what's on the market is always fantastic. So here's just a few little bit close-ups of the overall thing, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this review. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think of the markers down below. Which side do you prefer? Do you prefer the Spectra or the Pro markers? Let me know. Have a wonderful day, folks, and as always, stay creative.